So we are all welcome again. I believe that we are fairly refreshed and that we can continue now. So before we left off, we had tried to unpack the whole ownership structure, how convoluted it can be, the fact that it opens us up to likely abuses and also then exposes us to various corruption risk areas, particularly conflict of interest. There is also the fear of terrorist funding, etc., and etc. And therefore, it's part of the reason why we must be wary. Looking at that in relation to the work we do every day, it places the obligation as to how then do we use the data that is being collected by the Registrar General or the Office of the Registrar of Companies. How do we use it to enhance the work that we do? IAA, how would you use it to, when you are doing your, is it pre-audit or, is it, the IAA does pre-audit, right? Or control, the internal audit agency. What do? They do the, yeah, so when you are doing your review and your internal controls, for our brothers in the security outfit and law enforcement, how are you using this data to do the tracking and also your investigation, and even prepare? Because one interesting investigative work that GII supported, the person in question denied ownership and kept denying. Oh, do you know about this company? He said no. Then at one point he said, oh, it belongs to my in-law. Then the person said, but we found out that you have this percentage stake in it. The person sat up. Immediately, you can see from the documentary that the individual sat up. And so for the various investigators, it would be a very useful source of data. Now we are going to move to, we said we will come and do questions and answers, but I believe that there will be more questions at some point in this discourse. So we are going to look at the next presentation. Is Edwin online? Right, so Edwin is going to take us through Beyond Shining the Light, the practical guide to understanding corruption risk and mitigating tools in the extractive sector. Edwin has 15 minutes to do that, and so we will time him and democratically pause him when his 15 minutes is up. So Edwin, you have the floor. Hello, Edwin. Just slow down a bit.
Can you hear me? Can you confirm?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, let me share my screen. I'm following your, since yesterday, I've been following how processes are going on the ground, and I would want to use participatory means to plead for some few more minutes. Looking into the house can be quite time consuming, so I might have to go a bit beyond the 15 minutes, but please bear with me and let's gather some interesting thoughts here. But I'll move straight into my presentation. Once again, my name is Edwin Warden, I'm Anglophone Africa Country Officer, and I'll be talking us through a bit some of the risk we see within the extractive sector value chain, and then some of the mitigating tools, some of the information that will be available to help your work, as Mr. Boedi mentioned. But I would like to kick off with how I'm going to end, which is partly what some few people have said today and also yesterday. Mr. Kisi Jabin did mention this. BOT and beneficial ownership transparency. It's important that we recognize its limits. It's only a means to an end. And that end, whether it is for communities to benefit from resource management or for GRA to gather more domestic resource mobilization, more revenue, whatever the end is, beneficial ownership is just a means to achieving that end. And it's just one tool. I always say that it's one tool out of the several tools within a toolbox. So we'll talk a bit about beneficial ownership and share some few highlights on some of the other tools within that toolbox that you can pick up at any time, combine it, whether with asset declaration or income declaration information, to be able to do your investigative work and oversight role. So I want to also share some 4 quick points on why we often say the extractive sector, unlike many other sectors, are particularly important to pay closer attention to. The first one is, we all know the extractive sector is notoriously known for corruption. Someone did mention the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act as one of the examples where he was sharing. And this is the US Securities and Exchange Commission enforcement, where they monitor and take action on corruption issues happening by US companies in other jurisdictions. And if you pick 1 out of every 5 cases where they have an enforcement action, you're looking at the extractive sector right there. And it goes to show how important that sector is when it comes to the issue of corruption. And of course, the ability to address corruption in that space means that you would make really huge strides when it comes to addressing corruption. The second one is what we've often seen, and everybody knows that when it comes to extractive sector, it requires a huge amount of investment, huge amount of revenues are involved. And because of that, you often see that in negotiations of extractive contract, whether it's oil mining or gas projects, you have very, very few limited people engaged in the negotiation who at some point have to use discretionary decision making, where as much as they might consult the local people, when somebody made this point excellently yesterday, they might not take their final decisions based on the consultation. There will be a lot of discretions in there. So not everybody will be on the table when financial decisions and investment decisions are being made, which is again why it is extremely important that oversight bodies play an important role in checking and monitoring a space that is very limited to very few people taking decisions. The third reason is that extractive sector is extremely technically complex and financially complex as well. When again, I make reference to the Jubilee Oil Holding Limited case, and the argument being made by Honorable Ejapa constantly points to how they had to take some financial decisions within a relatively short time. And that's why they needed to set up, a company. And again, why was that company in the Cayman Islands, a tax haven? So there are so many technicalities and financial complexities that come in whenever we're discussing the extractives. And not many people would get the liberty of understanding. When fewer people understand, there's also fewer checks and balances. Of course, you can't really join a conversation and help shape it if you fully do not understand the conversation. Again, this is why we've reached out and we're trying to work with, many of you who are in different sectors in terms of oversight role, to see how can we build on our expertise within the extractive sector and your expertise in oversight role to make sure that with that common understanding, we can all work collectively towards making sure that there's greater integrity within the natural resource and extractive sector. The final one, of course, is natural resources belong to the people. And the people also include the politically exposed persons. And oftentimes the lines become very blurred on, who owns what on behalf of who. Where do I step in as a private person versus a public person? So we see a lot of cases that involve politically exposed persons, which is why we also have to address this issue, because at the end of the day, the law says natural resources belong to Ghanaians. So the benefit of it should end up with Ghanaians. So these 4 reasons, if we can keep in our head, are some of the key reasons why, for us, the extractive sector, unlike other sectors, needs particular attention. Just to go into some of the key risk or common risks that we see within the extractive sector value chain. And I'm going to speak about on 4 or 5 of them, and I'll share the slides with you so you can have a bit more closer look into them. But the first one we want to highlight is on license allocation, which is basically the beginning, when decisions are taken about, moving on with an extractive project. So oftentimes, whether it's an exploratory or production license, we see that this is one of the most valuable prizes anybody can get. It's very lucrative, similar to what someone mentioned, for example, about the Malibu case involving Dana Tete. So you see that there's huge competition within that sector to make sure that you grasp some of this licensing, whether it's ASM licensing or it's large-scale mining licensing. Because of this competition, there's often the risk of bribery, undue influence, either by, foreigners coming directly to the vice president's office trying to influence decisions, or by, politically exposed persons like Dana Tete, who knows that, this field is quite lucrative. So let me try to grasp it and, get as much as I can from it. So license and contract allocation becomes one of the most important areas. The next one is on contract itself, the documents that has been negotiated and signed. And I mean, within the extractive sector, the contractual terms is what really sits at the heart of all extractive sector corruption cases in most of the time. Here, there's often the question of, really trying to understand what are the obligations given to a company within the contracts. How much taxes are they supposed to pay? How much environmental obligations are they supposed to commit to in a particular year? And who are those involved as signatories in that contract? Are companies actually obliging or complying to the fiscal regulations? Is there potential conflict of interest? We've seen so many risks around the contracts that have been signed and allocated. That is really an important area to look into and see what role the bioinformation can play here. We've seen many cases, for example, where, like the EU group conversation that Dr. Steve mentioned. I was actually doing a bit of check a couple of months ago where I spotted this this case where, you get to understand that someone who had an official public role had, because of his work that he has done to make sure a company that was Cosmos comes to Ghana and operates, they had to set up a company to get the sweat equity, which is basically that small portion, about 3% of Cosmos being given to them for their role in bringing Cosmos Energy to Ghana, which again brings this issue around a conflict of interest to play. So that the terms of that contract is extremely important in really understanding corruption cases. The other bit that I also want to talk about is on SOEs. And actually here I wouldn't speak much about because someone has alluded to why, for example, we pay a lot of attention to GMPC for various good reasons, whether it's the case of the Jubilee Oil Holding Limited, or it's a case of, according to some research and investigations that has been done not long ago, spotting that, the share ownership or the legal owners disclosed in this offshore companies are actually human beings and not the ministry or not GMPC itself. So again, there are a lot of concerns here that needs to be addressed, and we'll come back to that in a bit. The next issues here, there are commodity trading issues around the sales of oil and gas and what revenues comes in. There's issues around payment flows and revenue collection. But another important bit that I think for many of you coming from the subnational entities to realize is around the subnational payments. So whether it's transfers going to the government and then being transferred to you, or direct payments from companies to the subnational entities directly. There's often the case that these are unknown. A lot of times, I've spoken to some DCs within some subnational areas in Western region where they said they weren't aware that companies were supposed to make certain direct payments to them. Other times, when they do know, the formalities are too much for them to be able to understand. So really getting to understand not only beneficial ownership information, but also actually other revenue payments being disclosed in many avenues would help you to understand the complexities, and be able to address some of these challenges. So I would just, out of this sort of 8 areas where we see a lot of risk, whether it's a conflict of interest or undue influence or payments of bribes or hoarding of revenues and not using it for the purposes that they are meant to serve. The key point here is what Samuel has mentioned, the risk of not knowing. The reason is because as later conversations will come in and we have someone from the ground to be able to share some experiences with you. When a person, a beneficial owner, owns a company, whether directly or indirectly, and is playing a particular role in a company, and that company has a particular attitude within a government or within a country. So in the cases where they do not often pay corporate income taxes, or they do not oblige by the contractual obligations to pay environmental taxes, or whether they are very used to paying bribes to be able to get contract renewed. When they do that in one country, you often see the case that they would want to replicate the same cases in other countries where they operate. So one of the investigations that will be shared today would shed a bit of light around how, companies beneficial owners behind companies will be breaking particular laws, not only in Ghana, but breaking the same laws in other countries. And you'll find that very interesting to see why beneficial ownership will be important. So we have some of these cases here noted around, for example, the Malibu case, just for you to know. We can share the slides so you can look more closely into it. But where we see beneficial ownership playing a role, basically is to help prevent this conflict of interest, because you get to know exactly who is behind the companies. If you get to know the ultimate beneficial owner, then there's that opportunity and there's that chance to be able to use, of course, investigative means to make that case and address, prevent the conflict of interest from happening. Another thing it helps you to do is to really review the track record of whoever is applying for licensing within your country. And again, happy to say that the investigation that will be shared later on the license allocation would demonstrate how the ability of checking the past records of companies is extremely important whenever you do due diligence before mining license awards are given out to companies. There's also the ability of BEO to help really expose shell companies and schemes that really facilitate whether it's tax evasion or whether it's round tripping, or all those mechanisms that companies use to avoid, really putting out a lot of their profit, because their main aim here is how do we make sure that we maximize our profits. So whatever they can do to understate their profits and pay less taxes, they would do that. And they do that by, setting up shell companies, as someone mentioned, paper companies here and there, and trading at arm's length here and there. So if nobody knows, we are not able to really address that challenge, which means a lot of monies that would have ended up with the government ends up in the packets of profits as profits to a lot of these beneficial owners. So it really helps in that sense of identifying these shell structures and how to prevent those. And of course, the final bit, just to not spend too much time on this, is how much beneficial owners can help really mobilize revenues. Favor did mention how some of these investigations in Nigeria has helped to really retrieve a couple of revenue for the government. For those who have been following the Panama Papers, a recent report about not long ago said that since the last 5 years when the Panama Papers came out, about 1.3 billion US dollars have been retrieved based on various investigations that went on after the report was published. So there is a huge benefit for many of you there to demonstrate the value of BEO in helping the government really mobilize more revenue at a time when, we are heading to IMF for a 3 billion support, where by closing a lot of these revenue gaps within the country, we might actually be able year on year to get a lot of revenue that might be close to what we are asking IMF to provide us. But again, let's mind the gap. BEO does not do it alone, so we have to combine efforts here. I'll just get into the how very quickly, but I want to use this before I get there to demonstrate this quick story to you. I'm sure many of you know our very own Putin. but many of us may not know Arkady Rotenberg. He happens to be a very good friend of Vladimir Putin. From stories that we read around, they are very good friends. They grew up actually together, and they grew up now playing judo quite a lot. But there's an interesting twist to their friendship that comes to you and I, our lives as well, which I think is important to make. And it goes through the UK as the story goes. So just to share with you here, between 2011 and 2016, the UK Companies House, which is basically the equivalent of the Registrar General, experienced about over 200% increase in the number of Scottish limited partnerships that were registered within this period. In that particular time, about 17,000 of these companies were registered in at least 10 addresses only. Now, one would ask why Scottish limited partnerships? Unlike many other forms of setting up a business within the UK, Scottish limited partnerships are kind of companies that have relatively limited transparency parameters on them. So one of the things is that they are actually not expected to disclose who owns the company, who are their real beneficial owners. So around 2017, there was an investigation by some CSOs that found out that a lot of companies were abusing the loophole in the law that didn't require Scottish limited partnership to disclose their bills. So a new law came in 2017 that now mandated these SLPs to disclose their new ownership. And there we saw huge drop, about 80% drop over time in the number of these kind of companies that were being set up. Again, if you have nothing to hide, why do you all of a sudden, when you're supposed to disclose your beneficial owners, drop in the number of this kind of companies that is being set up? When we look very closely around the same time, there was another kind of businesses that could be set up, the English Limited Partnership. They were also in the same boat as the Scottish Limited Partnership. But fortunately for them, the new regulation did not cover them, which also means there was a loophole. So you could see that right after this new law came to being, whilst registration of SLPs decreased over time, all of a sudden there was an upshoot on the registration of ELPs, the English Limited Partnerships, again, because the transparency requirements there gave that loophole for them and a lot of people to move from this side to now establishing this kind of companies. Now, recent investigation done by Finance Uncover actually came out to realize that a lot of the Russian oligarchs who were connected to Vladimir Putin were actually using this loophole to create many, many, many companies within the UK that was then laundering money into Russia to help and facilitate a lot of the issues that were going on in Russia. So particularly was this case around Arkady Rotenberg and his brother. He's called Boris Rotenberg. They have actually been sanctioned by the US government. They are under investigations for issues around money laundering, fraud, and in connection to the annexation of Crimea in 2014. But they had bypassed the US investigation and had been able to establish, companies here in the UK and now using a different model, a different conduit. What actually people got to find out was that one of the companies that they owned, it was called Sanara Company LP. It was set up in 2017 as an English limited partnership in downtown London. Now, this company was meant to be a tourist and ticketing service company, but you would see if you check their track record, their financial transactions, they were constantly sending particular amount of money to someone who was supposed to be an art advisor, amounts more than 100,000 US dollars, which the US actually connected to some of the issues happening within Russia when it comes to the annexation of Crimea. And even not so, more recently, the case around the Ukraine and Russia war, when there's been a lot of sanctions on Russia. The point is, how are they being able to fund most of the operations when official sources or official avenues are blocked? So many resources point to the fact that these Russian oligarchs, who are most of the time actually close associates and confidants of the president, are the ones setting up various obscure companies to be able to then channel money through money laundering schemes into Russia to help sustain what is going on. So a lot of the investigation has been pointed out in the UK BBC report, and I've shared it in the slides that you can have a bit of access to read more about the story. But again, it really tells the importance of how you solve one problem, but then, these guys are also smart and they'll move to another avenue to be able to do what they do best. So just to show you how how to use beneficial ownership information, I'll just do a bit of a teaser and walk us through a memory lane. I know there's the Ghana Integrity Awards offered by GII every year. So let's look forward to 2025 and imagine that any of us in the room today had been awarded this award in 2025. And then we look backwards. Let's say today you received a tip-off that from an unknown source, that a certain company called, Ohima Company Limited, let's say OCL, an international oil company. And just so we know, all of this is actually real life issue. We're just trying to storify it to make it easier for our understanding. But Ohima Company Limited is an international oil company operating in Ghana. And the leak told you that they have siphoned an amount of 78 million to an offshore account, which is owned by Ohene Investment Fund. The source also tells you that the money was meant to be a mandatory, a legal contractual transfer of a 1% company profit to Omamba community, which is a fishing community in a republic of, let's say, Omofia, as per a section of the country's law. The person also tells you that a certain John Doe happens to be the ultimate owner, and that person is part of a bourgeois family somewhere in Dubai, and he controls Ohene Investment Fund. How do you start? Where do you go? How do you find, answers to these leaks or these allegations as they currently stand? And we'll just go through a few slides on how to be able to do that. I'm going to talk you through some 4 quick phases, and we can have a bit of conversation at the later stage if there is time. But the first one here is basically being able to calibrate the risk. Whenever a conversation or a leak or some interesting investigation comes to you, I think it's important to really substantiate whether, cost-wise, benefit-wise, whether it makes sense to proceed. So one of the ways that the World Bank has suggested in this document, a license to drill, is to be able to use the revenues involved in terms of investment in that particular project and the level of disclosure of information on their legal or beneficial owners to really ascertain the level of risk associated with that particular issue and whether and how it will be important. Sorry for the background noise. My little one is here and making a bit of noise, but I hope it's okay. But here, where you want to pay more closer attention is towards the far end, where we see that the revenues are substantially large and where they are either politically exposed persons, whether they are domestic or foreign. It is important to actually look into those cases. But even more interestingly, when there is only a legal person who is noted, but not the actual beneficial owner. So in cases where it's domestic or foreign, and they're
commercial break. Yeah, so Edwin, can you hear me? Hello, Edwin. Hello. Edwin, can you hear me? Hello, Edwin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, so we went on a short commercial break. We're back. So I'm sure if you can just go a few steps back talking about the things we look out for using the World Bank license to drill document to then
All
decide
right.
on whether to proceed or not, if you can take that again. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Thank you. And maybe, Mr. Michael, can you give me a hint of how much time I do have so I can know how to run through this?
We are not doing well on time, by the way, but
All
if you
right.
can wrap up.
I'll do my best. Yes. So the point I was making here is essentially basing your assessment of the initial risk of whether you go into investigating a case or not on the amount of money involved, which is on this side, and based on the level of disclosure of corporate ownership structure. And we see that at the very end of it, where a politically exposed person is involved, and when the amounts involved are relatively high, then it's definitely a yes case to look into. There are cases where the amount is really low and where the natural person, the actual beneficial owner, has been disclosed. In those cases, there's a less likelihood that there's a smoking gun there. So then the recommendation is that you might not want to look into these cases. But I was making the point that this is very relative. So whilst $1,000 US, for example, or equivalent in Ghana might not be relevant for the grand scheme of things when it comes to looking at a national case, it might be relevant for a regional coordinating council internal audit officer T region in Boga, because these amounts might really be relevant for them at their region, but they might not be relevant. So even though this would look low at this point, it might be very high for a regional representative or auditor who is looking into a case. So please treat this very carefully as more of a guide. But I guess we all get the point here that the more obscure the ownership is, in the case where legal owners are provided, but not the actual beneficial owners, and where politically exposed persons are involved and the amount is huge, we're looking at mostly a high-risk issue that needs further investigation. And you can read a bit more on the documents here. I've attached the link so that you can review that. The next thing you want to do is really to understand whether there are any red flags in terms of an attempt to really conceal the beneficialness of a company. And the first one, I'll walk through this very quickly. And the first one is, there's always a talk in town. When you go to any community in Ghana, people actually know who are the owners of companies. They have intel. And sometimes this cannot be substantiated, but of course, they are valuable information to be able to pick up on. Sometimes you pick up market intelligence from some competitors of that company, or, you would hear about a particular company who has been operating, having businesses, showing up in every deal that is happening in a particular region. And that really sort of draws your attention to, okay, this looks like an interesting case to look a bit into. The other one is to check whether the company is getting any preferential deals from the government. And the ACA solution issue was a perfect example. Why is this particular company being able to get deals from government that many other oil and gas companies were not able to get? And when you go back and check, the beneficial now involved, he's called Shell Ingeroke. He's Norwegian, where we are based here in Oslo. And his work is huge and his influence is really, really huge. So when I understood who the beneficial owner was for that project, of course, I understood why, they might be able to pull certain strings. Also, you might also see how certain times the engagement at the corporate level has very direct lines to political engagement. So what is the connection between Norway and Ghana at the political level? And how does that play out when companies from Norway, for example, or the US or the UK want to do business in some of our countries? So again, understanding preferential deals given to certain companies might be an important bit. The investigation that our colleague will be sharing later will also point exactly to this, where an ASM area designated for ASM license was actually, why was this particular company the first one to get this? So getting a bit into that case. Of course, there's the issue of non-compliance with industry rules. And here you can pick that information up where particular companies have not been paying taxes, but then they've not been sanctioned by the government. Why is that the case? EITI reports would show you that company A or B was supposed to pay corporate income tax. But if you look through the EITI reports for the last 10 years, you know that that company has not been paying. and there's been no sanction. They're still operating business as usual. Again, that sounds like that's a case to investigate. And Dr. Steve said that in his submission, that PIAC EITI reports constantly point to some of these things, but nobody picks it up. So I think this is a very interesting point for you to really understand some of these red flags and how to actually look into some of these cases. So I'll just move on for the sake of time, and you can read a bit more in the link that I shared here. The next one is then to be able to validate the beneficial owner information that has been provided to the corporate registry. And I've shared here the link. You can go to the Registrar General Department and request for any information for any company. But beyond the names, what you want to check is, for example, the address. Is the address actually a real place? And what address is being provided? We've seen cases where the address that was provided was in a cemetery. We've seen particular cases. In this case that I was describing about Boris and his brother Arkady Rotenberg, the companies that they set up was in an office here, if you can see on the right-hand side. It was just above a restaurant. And you would see that about 1,000 companies had been registered with the same address. 244 English limited partnerships companies were actually registered on the same address. You ask yourself, what is this small office actually really doing when several companies are registered on the same address? So by being able to sort of spot these trend lines, these red flags, you'll be able to then ask yourself, what is actually going on here? And then move a bit into the investigation. Again, you want to check whether the date of birth provided by the company aligns with the birth and death registry. We've seen cases where the dates that were provided as a beneficial owner of a person was actually a dead person or an unborn person. So some of this information will really help you to see whether you go into these cases because they are simple errors, or they might actually be cases that require a proper assessment and investigation. So again, the RGD sources would really help you in validating the information that you've gotten, not just on one case, but over a period of cases. And we know that you do have access to information much more than many others, so you should be able to access this information. I know I have 2 minutes, and I'll use this time to just share with you this work that has been done. Can you still see my screen, the new screen? Yes. So here, what is important is that with all this information, if you have bioinformation alone, you get very little out of it. But to really delve deep into an interesting investigation that really brings benefit, you have to connect the dots. And EITI, we've done a project in Colombia with an organization where basically we put the extractive sector data on companies together with public procurement contracts and data in Colombia. So you have the Colombian states, you have government entities around it, and public assets disclosure, and then you have company disclosure from EITI information. By merging all of that, basically that information to one, you're able to, and of course the politically exposed persons within the country, the disclosures by politically exposed persons, you're able to pick up specific red flags. And these red flags are cases where there's potential conflict of interest, where politically exposed persons own a share in a company that holds extractive license in the country. There are other cases where the asset declaration form has some irregularity. So where, for example, somebody declares in their asset declaration form that they have other income, but then they don't disclose where they have shares in a company, or the other way around. So those are red flags, which don't mean that they have committed any crime, but they are red flags that needs further investigation. So if you click on any one of them, let's say we click on this one here. Let me see. We see Lina Maria Orebe as the politically exposed person. You can download the asset declaration form to really look at it. She does not disclose their position, but shows her salary. Does not disclose other incomes. If she says that her other incomes is zero. But we see here that she actually owns shares in Ecopetrol, which is one of the major companies in Colombia. So there's there's red flags here in terms of potential conflict of interest where a politically exposed person owns shares in a state contracting company. So this is done in an IT way, a bit cuter way, but there are, of course, practical ways and manual ways of doing this in the meantime. And as Lucia mentioned at the beginning, if there's appetite to work with EOCO or to work with internal audit institution, agency, or any other law enforcement agency to develop some of these tools to really help you to know where to look, we're more than happy to start that conversation at some point with you. Just to finish up with this example here, I just want to show that with all the questions that came, you can see that yes, this particular case was relevant and a case to look up for because the amount involved was huge, 78 million. It involved a foreign beneficial owner. There was suspicious dealing in terms of siphoning of money. How can you validate that information? The Office of the Registrar General was there. And what other information could you use? And here I just share a couple of relevant information in case you want to check the contracts. Minerals contracts are here. All the links are provided so you can access them. Petroleum contracts are also here. In case you wanted to check whether they are actually making payments, EITI, GATE and EITI provides really adequate, solid data. You can click on any of them and be able to access quality information about Ghana. You select a country and be able to access Excel data and do the analysis with it. If you want to check commodity trading information, GMPC provides a lot of this information up to 2019. And then if you want to check, of course, beneficial owners beyond Ghana's border, you can go to either the UK register, you can go to Open Ownership, also has a huge register of several companies to be able to ascertain that information. So just my final point, I've also mapped out all the relevant information that you can find here.
Hello.
I'm wrapping up in 1 minute, Mr. Bodie.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. So you could be able to check whether the information you're looking for is revenue data or non-revenue data and see exactly where you can find that information, whether in GATE reports or the relevant government institution. So across the value chain, we have all of that information mapped out for you so that you can easily look at this figure and know where to find the information. Where we say information is systematically disclosed, we mean that that information is actually available in the government website. If it's not systematically disclosed, then it means you can find that in the Ghana EITI report or PIAC reports. So you can find some of this mapping very useful here. My key takeaway is just to wrap up. The extractive sector is very known and for corruption, and it would take beyond the Registrar General, beyond us doing EITI reports, it would take auditing and investigation to really make sure that we address this corruption issue within the extractive sector. So we're calling on you to work together to be able to use beneficial ownership information, which is only a means to an end, but together with other data to do a lot of investigation and find out a lot more interesting cases. There are a lot of tools and information as we've shared here, but what I want to really say is that connecting the dots is extremely important. We can't do this alone without combining different data sources and without working together between EOCO, Auditor General's Office, and other organizations working collectively. So those are my points, and apologies for running a bit behind time, or over time. Over to you in the room, Mr. Mike.
I think that even though you slaughtered our time, your audience seems to be very happy because you have gotten the loudest applause so far. So, Edwin, thank you so much. This has been very useful. We have to move on to the next slide, but somebody may be here who has one thing to ask or the other. We want to be very democratic. So if there is any burning issue, I'm sure Edwin can take one question and then we can move on. But if there isn't, well, the silence means that there isn't. So, okay, right.
Thank you very much. I'll be quick with it. While we have a number of the institutions here with us, I just want to ask if there are any institutions who have the mandate to do this sort of tracking, where basically we're building a database just to be able to know or see if there are red flags in terms of the disclosures that are coming up, where red flags are popping up, if any institution has that mandate to be able to do that. And related to that, one thing I don't think we've mentioned, I've been here, the issue of national security. It's not just about corruption, but This unraveling should also help us to go to focus on security issues. I'm not sure how many of us here will be happy if you find out that a number of companies incorporated and running in Ghana are owned by Somalian pirates or members of Al Qaeda, and that can easily happen. And also, of course, if also we are not tracking the number of companies, both in terms of absolute number, also in terms of the value of their business, they're also owned by foreigners within our own jurisdiction. I think that also presents a national security problem, because the activity, sometimes they are deliberate, but then coordinated, has a very huge impact on your economy. So I'm also thinking, are we tracking for the basis of national security?
Thank you, Edwin. So, well, I'm sure you said something like that, you shouldn't use one data source. He's asking whether there is one organization that is doing the tracking. Is there that allows us to be able to find? So, is there an open data source where people who want some information can go there in 30 seconds?
Very quickly, I think this is a question I'll throw back to the audience. For EITI, when we work, our modus operandi is that countries own the process. So if there is YOCO, if there is the Internal Audit Institute, if there is a special prosecutor, I think Mr. Kisi Jabin did mention that they are trying to collect a couple of asset information, asset tracing, income tracing, and all of that. If, for example, they are keen to, bring all this information together as one to then help all other agencies to be able to do that, then we can work with them in terms of bringing the data together, synergizing the data, and then making it available. But we will not, because we trust on the country's sort of ability to do that, I'll leave that question back to stakeholders. I think that will be an interesting outcome of this conversation, whether somebody wants to take that mantle and then we can work together in developing something similar.
Right. Thank you very much, Edwin. I think at this point, we will allow you to sit back, and you are not dismissed and discharged completely. We'll take the next presentation, and then during the Q&A, there may be some questions that you may want to shed light on. So you're still with us. Thank you. And Edwin, I think we should give it up to Edwin.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to say that Edwin worked very actively with GI to make sure this program comes to light. So, Edwin, we thank you so much. So the next presentation is going to look at what are the common corruption risks and the awards of mining licenses in Ghana. Mrs. Mariada would have done this presentation, but she's held up somewhere. So Jacob will take that place. Jacob, you have the audience.
Thank you, Michael. Right, I'll do my best to try and see if we can catch up, so that in case there are questions, that's where maybe I'll take the opportunity to expand. So basically what I will be doing, it's not limited to beneficial ownership, but something of that sort will pop up. And it's out of research that was conducted by the Ghana Integrity Initiative in 2019. And I believe the purpose was basically to highlight the key findings. I mean, this presentation will highlight the key findings of that research, which is on the mining licensing approval corruption risks assessment. And we will also provide basis for action on findings through awareness of priority risks that we are going to be identifying. Licenses is basically what Edwin had mentioned. It's one of the areas where corruption is identified. And OEC acknowledges that that's one of the hotspots when it comes to the onset of corruption in the extractive industry, more focused on the mining sector, especially under this research. And eliminating the risks and vulnerability is an important part of an effort to enhance the contribution of mining to the national economy. He mentioned something around negotiation as one of the key things. And if you have enjoyed some presentations by the Mineral Commission and other NGOs in the extractive industry, you notice that it is one area where the country either loses or gains. And so it's quite very important. Understanding the nature and sources of corruption risks and vulnerabilities in the licensing process is a necessary step, and we cannot deny that fact, because that is where, most importantly, people come into contact and decide on issues that affect the country when it comes to the extractive sector. Corruption, as noted, is a big obstacle. I've mentioned that. And the licensing is an area, well, I think I'm repeating myself, so let me go. So basically, Francis, you can go forward. The research that we conducted had 4 main areas. One is to look at mapping the mining and the mining award process, both practice and process. So process in the sense that that is how it's supposed to be. Practice is what is happening. And then we look at identifying vulnerabilities in those processes, both the process and then the practice. And then assess the corruption risk from the vulnerabilities emanating, and then we make recommendations for improving the mining licensing regime in Ghana. As I mentioned, the scope of our work was limited to Ghana. I mean, basically, that's where we are. We didn't limit it to a region or maybe a district, but then the whole country. And we're focused on mining, the large-scale mining, not the ASM. And again, gold was the sub-focus that we had. And gold, because about 90% of total mineral revenue or export comes from gold. And finally, the process of granting mineral rights with emphasis on the 3 main stages, which is the recognizance, the prospecting, and the lease. So these were the focus of the research. The methodology, and it's very detailed, and because of time, I'll just briefly mention this. Oh, okay. Edwin says he can't hear. I'm sure they work on that, maybe. Edwin, I'll give you a call later. So the whole methodology of this research is based on what we call MACRA, the Mining Awards Corruption Risks Assessment 2. It was developed by the Transparency International with experts for the Accountable Mining Program. And this is the program under which this research was conducted, and Ghana Integrity Initiative as part of the process. MACRA basically is a tool that is used to identify and assess incentives for corruption risks and vulnerabilities in the mining process. The tool has about 8 steps, very comprehensive, both identifying, scaling, analyzing, processing, and coming out with priority areas. Now, qualitative data were collected through DEX research, interviews, and focus group discussion. Collected were analyzed in line with the requirement of the MACRA tool. If you want to get a copy of the tool, you can have access to it on our website. If you go under resources, you would see under resources, you go under research, you get a lot of the researches Ghana Integrity Initiative conduct, and this research is there. You get access to the tool. Now, as part of the process, the study identified, going through the MACRA 2 processes, we identified 17 vulnerabilities to corruption. 6 from political factors, and again, you are hearing or seeing political factors, economic factors. These are all part of the MACRA 2 process, which will, when you go through, will let you categorize the risks into some of these areas. And so 6 of them we find under political factors, 3 from economic factors, another 6 from social factors, 2 from technological factors. Now, the study also identified and assessed 19 risks. So out of the 17, 19 risks through a process were identified. And this came under the following categories. So we have contextual factors, process design, and I think I've mentioned the process being what it is, and then the process practice, which is what is happening. And then we had a unique category of what we call community consultation, which again came up to show something very interesting. So out of the 19 corruption risks identified, as well as going through the process of the MACRA 2, you would prioritize a number of them, which you feel are very important and can be solved. So in feasibility, impact, and the likelihood are what we considered in coming out with the 6 priority areas. So going through the priority areas, this is where I might take my time to explain a few things. So 1, we realize that, and we actually write the risks in a form of questions, which would then prick the answers that we require. So 1, we have, what is the risk that lack of community consultations create opportunities for applicants and cadastral officials to abuse community rights, engage in non-compliance, and practice corruption? So, stands now, law says that if you go through the acquiring licenses process, at a point when you apply, the Mineral Commission will notify the district under which your concession will fall. And the law says the assembly, those who own the land, Alodia landowners, and then the chiefs. So these are the 3 categories of people. The law acknowledges that in practice, for owners of the land, in most cases, they are not looked out for and notified, because there could be many. So what the law mainly, what the practice is to inform the chief, inform the assembly. And the law gives a period of time where anybody who has concerns with the notification, in terms they are telling you that there's going to be mining here, if you have any concerns, then you write to Mineral Commission. Previously, you write to your assembly, and the assembly will then forward your complaint to the Mineral Commission, which will then sit down and maybe act on it. I use the word maybe because mostly complainants may not get the reply or don't get reply. So what it stands now is that if, and the risks of corruption here is that if I am a mining company and I know that there are these 3 people, well, let me use the word, even the Alodia landowners are not in. So these 2 people are mainly my focus. What do you think I will do? I can easily reach out to the assembly, reach out to the chief, and there are evidence where chiefs have given out areas and the people are not aware that the license, this area has been awarded, and we didn't know anything about it. So what we are saying is that there's a huge risk there, and this creates room, both the cadastral official and individuals, investors, can take advantage of. Now, cadastral official, it was shocking when one of the areas we went to, taking the community members through the need for them to be involved in the consultation process. And the official of Mineral Commission said that there was one community here, this time even using their own process. The chief said he wouldn't take the notice. They are not interested. Okay, he won't take the notice. He should take his notice. What does that mean? Let me just throw that to you. What does it mean? What is the chief communicating? Maybe just 2 answers from a lady and then a gentleman. One says, the lady says, the chief is not interested. Is it true? Now I asked the Mineral Commission official, what did you do? He said, I went back and told my bosses that we have informed them. So what the act of the chief did not reflect the intention that he wanted communicated to the Mineral Commission. They were not interested in allowing mining in that area. But the official said he went back to tell his bosses that we have informed them, so we can go ahead. Because he's dealing with one person. If he was supposed to engage the community, that would have been different. And so we'll come to that. Now the second one says, what is the risk that face-to-face processing of application is expensive and time-consuming and will create opportunities for corruption? I'm happy that this process has been solved, but then as at the time we were doing this in 2019, it wasn't. And the fact was that people who needed license had to travel wherever they are, come to Accra to do this. And you can imagine, if I want to spend days in Accra, and get the license, I would definitely, if I have the means, grease some palms and do some things to get my process going through. And so the face-to-face, you go to Mineral Commission, see a lot of people there. And these people try and get to know some of the officials who are handling the various processes. And we believe that there's a likelihood for corruption to occur in that environment. Now the next one is what is the risk that notices about the gold mining licensing application are given in languages and channels that are not accessible by women. And here we're focusing on gender, women and men. Indeed, it's not limited to women alone, but their case was quite unique, directly affected by mining project. Has any of you come across the Gazette notification for Mineral Commission? Has any of you? Has anybody seen it? No. When we began this project, and I got hold of it myself, and I'm saying myself not to say I'm a mining expert or anything, but I've gone to school, at least. I looked at the document, and I was struggling to understand the areas that are demarcated for the mining. I just couldn't comprehend it. And imagine this is going to a community where people cannot read or write English, please. The literacy has to do with languages. So if you can read and write, you are literate. But I mean, the document is in English. These people cannot read and write English. And yet you are going to present this to the people. So they have a notice board where they paste, the assembly will paste the Gazette notification. I will come and stand by it and still not understand what it means. So we realized that this was also an avenue. So once the document is in this form, and you have, I think, 10 days. Yeah, 10 days to respond to the notification in writing. And there were instances where people have raised concerns with the assembly, and they claim that nothing of that sort got to the Mineral Commission in their process of giving out the license. They didn't know that people were agitating on that concession. So this is, again, one of the things. So I was talking about men and women because if men were struggling in those communities, you know how the gender imbalance when it comes to education is. So women will find themselves in hotter soup. Again, women who own land, which quite sometimes is rare, may be ignored when opportunities come for the men to meet and discuss mining. Let me say, sometimes when they get to the stage of even negotiating compensation, they leave out the women. So that became a risk that we identified. We also have what is the risk that there are no laid down procedures for prevention and management of conflict of interest involving public officials and politicians in the mining licensing process. This has come to light. Has come to light even recently. You heard of, is it Chairman Wuntumi owning land? Now, the Mineral Commissions Act, as in the Mining Act, does not talk about conflict of interest. And we know how powerful people who are politically exposed can be when it comes to issues of this. We talked, Edwin had mentioned issues around the figures that comes in when it comes to investing in extractive industry. And so if there is no room to manage conflict of interest, and again, this can dovetail into beneficial ownership issues. So who is owning the thing? Is it politically exposed? How can it influence processes? These are all questions that we know can create room for corruption. When the issue of Akonta mining, I hope that's the name, came up, media made noise. What has happened? What happened? Thank you. They say they are still making the noise. Okay, so let's move on. What is the risk that details of areas that have been licensed for recognizance, prospecting, and lease are not fully and publicly disclosed? So like I mentioned, the document demarcating the areas that are going to be given out, it's not easily comprehensible. The people you are engaging are semi-literate, if I may put it that way. And so if they don't understand this process, indeed, whoever is interested in these areas can take advantage of that ignorance, can take advantage of that process and be able to engage in acts that are unlawful. And then we have finally, what is the risk that Parliament did not ratify signed agreement between the government and the applicant? So remember the case of Ibrahim Mahama when the issue of the bauxite went to court. It came out that the agreement had not been ratified in Parliament. So one of the areas we found out was it can be used as a tool to either punish the companies, even their genuine, or when it comes to political issues, and this can be played to favor some particular people corruptly, let me put it that way. So these were the priority areas that the research identified. Now for the recommendations or conclusions, Francis, if you can go a step back. We said that 1, the Minister of Mines and the Mineral Commission should put in place effective and efficient mechanism for sustained and meaningful stakeholder engagement and consultation to empower the stakeholders or communities to engage in mining licensing process. What we said was that in terms of the advocacy, that at least Mineral Commission should have some sort of processes to make sure that the community is involved in the licensing process. Currently, when Galamsey became Hula Balloon again, I've been told they're adding a new layer, which is the paramount chief must be informed. It's one person, if anything at all. It's just a step layer. If I am a corrupt applicant or an investor, you added the paramount chief. Excuse me, I can go and see the paramount chief and settle him on whatever issues. So I'm not saying they are corrupt, but I'm saying there's a risk. If you make it possible for the community, let's assume, for example, as part of the process, if the chief is informed, he's supposed to hold a DEBA, which is supposed to be videoed, where the community are informed about who is coming to own the concession, what is coming to do, what is in it for them. And the community decides that we want to or we don't want to give out this land. Then this is captured. Mineral Commission will then have a say to say, oh, the community or the whole people agreed that this should go on, or they did not agree that this should go on. There were instances where the boss of Mineral Commission himself has said they went to one of the places in BA where the town folks chased the place, saying that they are not interested in having giving the place out. I mean, the chiefs, individuals who have the power have signed. Community said they won't allow mining to take place in the BA, I think in Kranza area, thereabout. And so that's evidence of lack of consultation. So that is one of the things we advocated for. Now, the Mineral Commission should prepare and publish procedures for managing conflict of interest involving public officials and politicians in mining licensing application process. And as I mentioned, this has to do with BO finds itself within this. Initially, when we were engaging with the Mineral Commission, BO was in the process, almost being finalized. And we left it out because we were told that the Mineral Commission's document for applying had incorporated BO in it. Our thought, company Registrar General was going to handle BO issues. And so if, in any case, if Mineral Commission collects information, it will still go to the Registrar General and they should handle it. But as we stand now, we realize that no, well, for extractive industry, there should be a little focus on BO in order to raid it off any criminals who could take advantage of the sector. And so, as part of conflict of interest management, we also would advocate for a specialized BO for the extractive sector in order to prevent corruption in that area. And then notices on mining licensing application processes should be published in languages and at locations which are easily accessible to the people in the community. So at least if many areas have one language when it comes to areas where concessions are given, we should find a way of us changing the document to a form where the people can really understand and be able to raise their concerns where they need be. And like we mentioned earlier, a platform must be created. Meaningful consultation must be sorted as part of the process of awarding licenses. Expand the list of persons to be consulted on or notified in the application process to include queen mothers. We wanted to put a focus on gender. You know, the women will rally around the queen, the men will rally around the king. When the king calls his people, normally they will be men. The queen calls his people, there will be women. So we are saying that even if at that stage you want to inform people, include this, and we even added CBOs and CSOs. These are groups that are conscious about issues, and they can really tell you the impact of some of the mining operations that are going on. And so if licensing come up, they will be able to peruse the issues and give you proper feedback. Again, we said either legally or administrative reform is required to provide schedules and timelines within which the minister must submit signed agreement to Parliament for ratification. So Parliament is a representation of all of us. And so when agreements are being signed and it goes to them, the assumption is that as they peruse, they may be able to come up with some issues that we don't get to see. I remember when, as part of the research, we engaged with the Chamber of Mines, and we're talking about disclosure of contracts. And they told us that it is not their problem. They don't have a problem with the disclosure of contract. They believe that once the document goes to Parliament, that document is public because Parliament represents the people, so it can come out. But as at that time, Mineral Commission was not publishing the contracts and then the agreements, but now they have agreed to do that. We also had 2 other recommendations that were quite high on the issues, especially with the Commission moving from a manual system to an electronic system, and they have done that using the mining cadastre that has now gone live and is being used for the work, and we believe that is a step in the right direction. And full public disclosure of licensed areas to promote transparency and accountability. Also, as part of the mining cadastral system that currently is online, you get access to those information. Edwin added it to one of the sources of information you could get when you are working on BO. I'd like to bring my presentation to an end here. If there are questions, then I may come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacob. I think he's kept his time. Man of integrity. Let's do better for him. Very well. Wow. So we still need to do another quick presentation before we take questions. I know you may, or I suspect you may have some questions, but let's take a quick presentation before so that when we do the questions, we do the questions as the break. I'm sure it's a fair arrangement, right? So the next presentation, we are looking at strengthening oversight in licensing contracting processes using beneficial ownership data for due diligence. And it will be done by Mr. Bismarck Ayongo, Executive Director of NOPRA. So let's give it up for him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. I will take all of us to rural Ghana, Talset district of Upper East region. Okay. Take you to rural Ghana, Talset district of the Upper East region of Ghana. Bring you back to regulatory institutions in Accra here. If time permits, we'll go to Madagascar, travel to Australia, and come back here to learn. And I'm sure I can do this in 10 minutes. Can we go? Yes, so briefly, this is the outline of the presentation. And we've talked a lot, particularly Favor, Edwin, and then Sammy said that talking to you about beneficial ownership is tantamount preaching to the converted. So I don't need to talk much about beneficial ownership, but just that to draw attention to the Act 992, which I highlighted key definitions or words about who a beneficial owner is. And if we have even forgotten about everything, I will just remember keywords like substantial control over, substantial economic interest, substantial control or influence over a legal person. These are words that are enough to let us keep on remembering who a beneficial owner is. And beneficial owner is very important in my case because the study was done on assessment of beneficial ownership disclosure and integrity screening of mining companies in Ghana using Cassius Mining Limited as a case study in the Talset district of Upper East region. So Once integrity screening is also a key concept in the study, I decided to rely on one of the authorities. The experts will tell you that if you want to talk about integrity screening, you can produce PhD thesis on it. But I just decided to pick one authority, that is Lisa Caprice, who said integrity screening is about mining companies making disclosures and mandated institutions not only checking the owners and political connections of these owners, but also doing background checks on the integrity record and reputation of the company as part of evaluating its mineral rights. So issues of fraud need to be checked, and this will help keep out persons with criminal backgrounds. Can we continue? Yes, so there is a motivation for the study. First of all, the bigger motivation is driven by the fact that there is a lot of empirical studies that have established that there is positive relation between anonymously owned companies and that of organized crime, including corruption, including tax evasion, including money laundering. So if you have an opportunity to do a little study on beneficial ownership, you should be motivated by this establishment. The specific motivation is that the company that is used as case study, Cassius Mining, came to this country at the time the government of Ghana realized that small-scale mining is critical to the survival of Ghanaians, and exclusively reserve a 72 square kilometer of land in the Tarsi district for small-scale miners. And before Cassius, all these over 41 small-scale miners were operating. So what happened? And government had to change its mind to open this small-scale mining area for large-scale mining. And this is Cassius Mining taking over the place that was reserved exclusively for the Ghanaian people. So that is one motivation. And it is further enhanced or driven by a study by Natural Resource Governance Institute that said that where there is preferential treatment to a business or a company, it is worth investigating. So this is established. Cassius Mining Company, it is not that the researcher did not just like the face, but there is an interesting association or issues associated with it. It is the only company that was in this country in 2014 and registered as Cassius Resources Ghana Limited. In 2016, registered as Cassius Mining Limited. In 2017, registered as Cassius Mining No. 2. So you can see that one company in Ghana, and if you look at the principal activity or their core mandate, it is almost the same. So you have Cassius Mining Limited that has the mandate to do what Cassius Resources is doing. You have Cassius Mining No. 2 that has the mandate to do Cassius Mining Limited, what they are doing. And they are registered in this country. If you look interestingly, all the key actors or players or beneficial owners in one company is seen in the other companies. So that is quite interesting. And you also have the same persons being key actors in another company called Gulf Industrials, based in Australia, with arrangements to take over 100% of Cassius Mining in Ghana. So these were some of the things that motivated us, coupled with widely speculated information that the characters here, the beneficial owners or the legal owners have questionable characters. Can we continue? So, every research has an objective. And to help achieve the objective, you need to answer questions. So the first question was, who are the BOs or beneficial owners of Cassius Mining Limited, and what is the integrity history of the company granted mineral right in Tennessee? And how is due diligence conducted in granting mineral rights in Ghana or lances? And are there legal restrictions on persons doing business in Ghana. These questions, in answering them, will help you achieve the main objective of promoting transparency and accountability in natural resource governance through improved, 1, beneficial ownership transparency, due diligence process in granting mineral rights, institutional collaboration of relevant stakeholders on integrity screening of companies, and compliance of law by industry. Can I see the next slide? So, every research, you need to gather data. So how did we gather the data? Public data source and non-public data source. Under the public data source, Register General Department, now ORC, Minerals Commission, Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, Office of Attorney General and Ministry of Justice, Ghana Police Service, especially the CID, Companies Act 2019, Companies Act 1963. Somebody may say, we now have the newest one. Why still refer to that? This one is still relevant because at the time of incorporation of the company, this particular law was in force. So it needs to match the law with them at the time and see if there are inefficiencies or inadequacies. Then online publications. The non-public data source, key informants in Ghana and key informants in Australia. Then we also have experts like the Edwins, the Samis, the Mantios, and all that coming in with expert knowledge to enrich the study. Then we also had some experts from Madagascar. Can we continue? So, all of us preaching these things to you will again mean preaching to the converted, because we are seasoned professionals and we know in doing every study you need all that. So what did we really find out? From all these numerous sources of information. 2 minutes? Wow. Okay, so we had every information about the nationality, the TIN numbers, the number of shares, percentage of shares of some personalities here. And this company, they registered in May 2016. In June, they changed some of the officials, and we have computed their shares and all that. Can we continue? If you look at this, you see the person involved and the percent of shares he has and well-documented criminal records of them. And these cases were determined by the Supreme Court of Australia. So you will have the person, and we're told by the experts that in the mining sector, the threshold to consider as beneficial owners are 5%. But in this case, you can see that apart from the one Ghanaian that is there, Kofi, and then this person that we could not establish his nationality, the rest are Australians, and these are their criminal records that have been. So if they have criminal records, and so what? Can we continue? The Ghana law versus beneficial ownership. In short, this law says if I've ever been convicted of any criminal cases, whether in Ghana or outside Ghana, there is a limitation or there is a restriction on you for running businesses in this country. And you can read the laws, Section 177 of the Companies Act, and all that. Can we continue? Since I'm running out of time. So we gathered the information, had to navigate to the website of the Australian Supreme Court and all over the experts, the leaks and all that, and gathered. And these are just excerpts of what we got from there. Because in the 21st century, and especially when you're doing research, you don't speculate. It must be backed by empirical evidence. Can we continue? Yeah, so results. These are the key findings. And as I said, the main thing is that it is established that they have criminal record. And by the laws of Ghana, these people were not supposed to. Yet they have been given. And we have gone to this Madagascar. They are having another company there. And the Madagascar law, just like the Ghanaian law, does not equally permit criminals doing businesses there. All right. So, can we go? Yeah, so these are just the recommendations. We think that when we're gathering the data, And we got to Minerals Commission. They share interesting revelations. How they collaborate with the Ghanaian police, especially the CID unit, to do due diligence, particularly on criminal records of companies. And we had to also ask the CID unit of Ghana Police, and they confirm it. So if this is what is happening, how come an ordinary person like Ayorka Adongo Bismarck was able to get the criminal records of these people, but these heavy institutions, funded by the taxpayers' money, could not get this, and we had to issue licenses to them? Very, very interesting, isn't it? So we need that effective collaboration of our state institutions going forward. If not, one day, the government of Ghana, who is the owner of the natural resources of this country, will wake up one day and they will hand over the natural resources of this country to hardcore criminals, and all of us will be in danger. Thank you very much. I'll end here.
Thank you very much. You see, the applaud, the enthusiasm of the applaud also shows that you kept to your time. Thank you so much. So now we are heading close to lunchtime. What we are supposed to do Q&A, but I think that we are going to do it differently. This time around, you are not going to ask the question. I am going to ask the question. Oh, yes. What I want is that all the organizations here represented should tell me how all that you've heard relates to your work and how you would use it to do your work. Because for us, GI, EITI, that is the motivation to carry on the way forward. So we want to see how all that, because you have heard from what BO is, the ownership structure, you have gotten the real life experiences, you have heard the mining, corruption areas. So you, as experts in your various fields, how does that relate to you, and how would it enrich your work going forward when you leave here? The takeaways, the job, what will you do differently at your workplace? And I please entreat all the IAAs to give us at least 2 or 3 response from IAA. I want 2 response from Yoko. I want 2 response from FIC. I want 2 response from OSP. And I want 2 response from SHRAJ. Then we go for lunch. This is the only time that I probably can hold you hostage. That if I don't get the 2-2 response, we don't go for lunch, democratically and participatory. So that, yes, the CSOs here present will go for lunch when lunch is due. And then the rest, the experts would have to cough some answers. Yes. So what we'll do is that let's start from SHRAJ, because they are our collaborators. Then we'll come to OSP. You want to make an interjection? No, because this one is a World Cup. Don't help OSP. When it gets to you, then you remind them what they should have said. That will help. Oh, then wait. It will get to you, OSP. It will get to you. Don't worry. We are pounding the fufu. Don't drink the soup, else we'll have nothing to eat. So I'll go to SHRAJ to tell me how all this will enrich the work. Please, the SHRAJ regional directors, representatives in Accra, please tell us how this will enrich your work going forward. How you would use the information that we've gathered. This is our takeaway. And Jay, please let's write it down and show to the world that this offers us an opportunity to continue.
Yeah, I think let's not be afraid to share our perspectives. It is not like commitment you are making to be that will be held against you or something. No, but there is the need for us to find that connectedness. Because if after all these series of presentations, you don't get the opportunity to also express how you intend to connect this to the work that you currently do, if we don't draw the linkages at this point, it will be difficult to just be hearing of information upon information. And so just try it. It's not like you are making a commitment that will be held against you. We know some of you work in a highly security domain. Don't tell the details, but just go ahead and share the broad views on it. I think it will be helpful for all of us. And that might even give others present here opportunity to also know how they could even support your work in terms of referrals and those type of things. So let's all open up and have a frank discussion.
Whilst we were talking, Shraj whispered in my ears that go to OSP first. They didn't. Oh, okay. Oh, when I haven't eaten lunch, I don't hear well. So I think I didn't hear well.
Well, we have listened to. First of all, we want to say this. For those of us who work for Shraj, we are not afraid of anything. So, so if we have to say something, we'll say it. So, we are not. Yes, that's the first thing. The second thing is we have listened to their presentations a lot. I think the last but one presentation, my thinking that as a lawyer, if you are talking about land issues and others, then not only about the investigation, but some of the land laws in Ghana will have to look at again. Because in Ghana, the land laws, the act is clear. Who owns the land? If it's a two area, it's the chief who owns the land. And by a decision of the Supreme Court, he's not accountable to his people. He's only accountable to the two elders. So if you are going to say that he must hold a deba and tell the people that this is what he has signed, then those laws must be looked at. Because a chief in Ghana is not accountable to his people. He's only accountable to the two elders. That's the law. That's the Supreme Court judgment. The person who wrote that judgment is Justice Broby. I remember very well. So that aside, for us, we are purely an investigative body, per annum. And we are, when I say per annum, that's the Supreme Court decision I'm referring to. But on the issue of corruption and some corruption-related matters, we can even investigate based on suspicion. So we think that this thing will help us when we are because the word suspicion or allegation is there. We can then go more than the what we have received if it's a complaint and look for other leads that can let us get to the bottom of the matter. So we think that this is very important. But also thinking that we may be faced with a lot of legal challenges. Because my understanding of the law is that the only institution that can lift a veil, at least for now, is a court of law. That's my understanding. I may be wrong. So if we are trying to, senior, yes. So we have to also look at that, because if I'm representing a company or I'm representing somebody and you want a disclosure, I'll hit you with a lawsuit. Because you have to go to court and let the court lift the veil. We as investigators cannot lift the veil. So yesterday I was telling Mr. Kwesi that we may try to do those things, but we will also be mindful of the legal obstacles that we have to overcome. Thank you.
I can see you were itching to say something. Or he said what you were thinking. Very good, very good. Oh, okay. So I've been directed to you. Oh, you also backing him. Okay. Since now we have a backing vocalist and we have the lead vocalist, my brother from OSP will give the OSP's rendition of the tune. How would this help your work?
Well, thank you very much. To a very large extent, I think that the issues of BO, as we have discussed in these 2 days, have unearthed a lot of issues to the Office of the Special Prosecutor. Just before this conference started, we had just launched the Asset Recovery and Management Policy Framework, a collaboration among all the law enforcement agencies to see to recover proceeds of corruption and other related crimes. That tells you the importance of coming together, sharing information, and also taking steps to ensure that we can collaborate to fight our common enemy. Indeed, you realize that the criminals work together. So how can we fight them effectively if we don't collaborate? And so my take home from here has to do with making sure that we can share information as much as possible, we can collaborate, and identifying people here from different institutions, like now making friends with people from ORC and other institutions. I believe that when it comes to getting information to enable our investigation, it becomes even easier. And that is the most important thing that I want from here. Number two, my brother Roxin will also tell what the things we are taking away from here. So Roxin.
Yeah, so what I've also taken away from this training is, you know, the OSP is just mandated to investigate corruption and corruption-related offenses, for which we've carved a niche for ourselves in procurement-related offenses. So therefore, I think it's going to help us in preventing conflict of interest, which is a major key difficulty. It has become a major problem in this country, and also detect anomalies in contracts and all that. Also in tracking, asset tracing and all that. So I think it will help us generally in also improving our due diligence in our work. Thank you.
So who next? Who's ready? So we have from OS. Yes. IA is going to redeem themselves. They are going to show the OSP and
Thank you very much. I think we have a representation of the district assemblies and the RCCs. Myself, I'm coming from the Western North region, which is endowed with forestry and mining resources. In fact, looking at the presentation that was done by, I think, Warden or so, there were some areas, risk areas, and we are supposed to help management of the district assembly to build risk register. And by knowing all these things, I think we have to help out to build, effective risk register when it comes to the resource management. And in fact, we also deal with the traditional authorities more as our assembly. And we solicit their input in order to get an effective risk register to help us do our audit. Thank you.
Yeah, to add to my colleague, yes, please. The information we have gotten here will help us to, in the area of procurement, especially the beneficiary ownership, be able to exactly know, go into details to know exactly those who own the companies that are coming to bid for procurement activities. So that is where I think it will help us.
Refuse to be a backing vocalist. Yes, yes. You are all lead singers.
FIC.
FIC is here.
So on the part of the FIC, I think that as you're already aware, we have been the coordinating agency when it comes to Ghana not being blacklisted or not being on the grey list. So I think the BO registry or register formed part of the action plans that we're supposed to undertake. So for the FIC is our national obligation to international requirements. And we're very happy that we see this coming into fruition now. It means that Ghana always moves a step away from being on the gray list or on the blacklist. In terms of, as you all are aware, with the issues relating to terrorism financing and then money laundering, and the special position the FIC finds itself in its ability to be able to collate data from all relevant agencies and competent authorities, I think that the Bureau Registry also forms part of access to that kind of information, because we are aware that when it comes into full flow, the FIC has a software that is going to be able to use to tap into this data, so that when we have to do any kind of analysis on any individual, we just go. So it's going to go a long way in aiding us in the discharge of our duties and our responsibilities in the fight against money laundering and terrorism financing. So the importance of the Bureau Registry cannot be overemphasized, and I think that it's a very right step. It's a good step in the right direction. So we're very happy.
You have backing vocalist?
Yes, there's a female backing.
It is snitch. Where is she? Aja.
Okay, so just adding something little to what my senior has already said. I'm an analyst, so I get the chance to tap into certain databases, which includes that of the RGDs. So whether it's a lot, because as I said, the key, then we should not leave it at a point. And so in my analysis, when I am reading through certain bank statements and I see certain names and certain keys, what I have to do, having and get to uncover what it must.
Albert and Yoko.
In the course of our work, we do rely much on the profile of company. We believe that the introduction of the BO is going to help us in doing our work. Yes, that areas that will help us arrive at a destination. And then this workshop has also opened our eyes to areas that probably we may think, oh, that place is not vulnerable when it comes to criminalities, the extractive areas. So as an investigative body, it has opened our eyes to delve into those areas as well, to think deep and not just say that, oh, it's not that vulnerable, but we have to do better. Thank you.
Okay. So he's snitching. Says they are there. They are there.
Well, just to add a little bit to what my colleagues said. The last presentation sort of drew our attention to the fact that this, organized crime, as we all know, is transnational.
Here present. But I also believe individually, irrespective of the institutions that you represent, also may have learned something, may just as a citizen will take away with you some information. Breaking for lunch now. Is lunch ready? Yes, so we are breaking for lunch now so that for those who have to check out can check out. Now, I'll be here and I'll trying to get some place where we can keep our things. So by the time you check out, you would find me here and I would direct you to where you can put your luggage. For the next 1 hour, then we are done. So we are going for lunch. We should be back by We said we were going to be back by 2, but 2 is not possible, so we'll be back by 2:30, so that we use the 30 minutes, they use 1 hour to finish the rest, and then we are done. Thank you very much, and have a good lunch.